Uh, have you ever felt it?
Felt what?
That sudden, almost overwhelming urge to just completely escape the daily grind.
Oh, absolutely.
Like to pack a single bag, leave your phone on a kitchen counter somewhere, and just disappear to a hidden, sun-drenched tropical paradise.
Where absolutely nobody knows your name.
Exactly. I mean, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't harbored that fantasy.
Right.
Especially when you are stuck in traffic on a rainy Monday morning and your inbox is just,
Overflowing.
yes, overflowing. It's so common.
It is a deeply universal impulse. We all carry around this quiet promise that if we just, travel far enough south or find the right secluded shoreline somewhere.
Your thing will just be fine.
Right. All of our modern anxieties, the emails, notifications, the endless obligations, they'll all just melt away into the ocean. We basically treat geography as a cure for psychology.
Geography as a cure for psychology. That is a perfect way to phrase it.
Thank you.
And that exact fantasy, along with the much darker reality that is kind of lurking right beneath the sand, is what we are exploring in today's deep dive.
It's a really heavy topic.
It is. We have a genuinely fascinating column today from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR.
Great source.
Yeah, it was published in October 2025. And just listen to this title, because the title alone gives you a sense of the weight we are dealing with today.
Go ahead.
It's called Wrong Way Up, and the Beach Echoes of Utopia and the Dark Side of Civilization.
It's an exceptional piece of cultural analysis. What makes it so compelling is how it takes two very distinct, very specific pieces of pop culture.
From different decades, right?
Right, and it uses them as a diagnostic tool to examine the health of our society. It forces us to look at what we are running toward, and more importantly, what we are actually running from.
So our mission today is to look at a 1990 experimental synth-pop album and a massive culture-defining year 2000 Hollywood blockbuster.
Quite the pairing.
We're going to see how these two pieces of media perfectly captured our collective obsession with escapism, the illusion of paradise, and the unsettling realities of modern civilization.
But to really anchor this, we have to set the stage first.
Right. I want you, the listener, to cast your mind back to the late 1990s.
It was a highly specific, almost fragile cultural moment.
It really was. Think about the global mood at the time.
The Cold War had just ended.
Exactly, lifting this massive existential dread completely off the shoulders of the world.
People were breathing a sigh of relief.
And the internet was just beginning to hum in our living rooms.
Back when logging on actually sounded like a fax machine.
Yes, that horrible screeching dial-up noise.
Yeah.
But it felt like opening a door to infinite possibilities.
There was a palpable, almost naive optimism in the air then.
For a brief, shining moment, the world actually believed in the concept of a global paradise. Like we thought we were building a borderless, connected utopia.
But as the MMR column points out, there were already subtle structural cracks forming in that dream.
The anxiety hadn't vanished.
No, it had just mutated.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand those cracks, we have to examine the first piece of the puzzle.
Right, which is a monumental clash of musical geniuses that took place between 1989 and 1990.
We are talking about Brian Eno and John Cale.
Two absolute titans of music.
But hailing from entirely different universes. I mean, you have Brian Eno, who had famously departed the glam rock world of Roxy music.
To pioneer the entire genre of environmental and ambient music.
Right. His whole philosophy was about creating vast, almost invisible atmospheres.
And then you have John Cale.
Who is completely different.
Entirely. He had moved away from the gritty, abrasive, urban noise of the Velvet Underground and was floating somewhere in this intense space between classical composition and the avant-garde.
Throughout the 1980s, these two had essentially been just orbiting each other from a distance.
They were well aware of each other's trajectories.
But in 1989, they finally collided in a London recording studio.
And collided is really the operative word there. The column highlights the intense friction that defined those studio sessions.
Because they just didn't work the same way.
Not at all. You see, Eno's instinct in the studio was always to subtract. He wanted to strip things down to their absolute atmospheric essence.
He treated music like a watercolor.
Yes.
But wait, wouldn't that just result in a muddy, chaotic mess?
How do you mean?
Well, if you have Cale, whose nature was to build to relentlessly stack melodies and create architectural drama, and Eno, who is essentially standing there trying to erase the whiteboard while Cale is drawing on it, How does an album even survive that process?
That is the beautiful paradox of their partnership. It was a space of profound, almost unbearable tension.
I can imagine.
But how Eno himself viewed that friction is incredibly revealing. What's fascinating here is a quote from Eno regarding this exact dynamic that the column includes.
What did he say?
Eno said, "You don't collaborate to agree. You collaborate to discover."
Wow. You collaborate to discover. That completely reframes the entire idea of conflict.
It does. They weren't fighting for control of the steering wheel. They were excavating something entirely new.
And what that tension ultimately birthed in 1990 was their collaborative album,
Called Wrong Way Up.
Wrong Way Up. The MMR piece spends a significant amount of time decoding that title.
Because it acts as the thesis statement for this entire deep dive.
It really does. The title carries a very heavy, multi-layered meaning.
On a macro level, Wrong Way Up represents a deep, pervasive discomfort with an upside-down world.
Like a creeping feeling that society's priorities are becoming completely inverted.
Exactly. And on a more personal, intimate level, the column describes the title as an allegory for a soul that is ascending but going astray.
Ascending but going astray. It's about the paths we take in life, thinking they are the right ones.
Yes.
Think about the corporate ladder, for instance. You hustle for a decade, you sacrifice your weekends, you finally get the promotion and the corner office.
And suddenly you look out the window and realize you absolutely hate the view.
Exactly. You climb the ladder firmly believing you were heading the right way, only to realize you've completely lost your direction.
That is the exact illusion of progress the album tackles. And you can physically hear that tension, that collaboration of friction, embedded in the music itself.
It's woven right into the tracks.
The column notes how Eno's signature, smooth ambiance, is constantly being disrupted and injected with Cale's intense melodic willpower.
So it's not just a relaxing ambient record.
No, the result is electronic, but it breathes and pulses like a living, anxious organism.
And nowhere is that clearer than on the album's most critically acclaimed track.
A 1991 song called Spinning Away.
The column spends quite a bit of ink on this specific track, referring to its melody as a sketch of memory.
A beautiful phrase.
I want to share a piece of the lyrics the author highlights, because they paint such a vivid sensory picture. The lyrics go, "Up on a hill as the day dissolves, with my pencil turning moments into line."
Those lines evoke a profound sense of floating, mixed with this aching, almost painful nostalgia. The column notes that the synthesizers on that track shimmer. They sound almost like bright sunlight reflecting off the surface of a very deep ocean.
But then you have Cale's voice cutting through that warmth.
Right, and the author describes his vocal delivery as sounding like a receding landmass.
Like you're sitting in a small boat, slowly drifting away from the shore. You are watching everything you know, everyone you love, get smaller and smaller on the horizon.
It's a beautiful image, but it induces a deeply anxious feeling. You are free, but you are untethered.
Untethered is the perfect word for it. And if we zoom out to look at the broader landscape of musical history, the impact of this specific album is massive.
Truly massive. The author argues that Wrong Way Up essentially became the pioneer of what they call 1990s and 2000s environmental pop.
So it didn't just exist in a vacuum.
Not at all. The musical DNA forged in that tense London studio by Eno and Cale directly paved the way for massive later acts.
Quite cool.
You can draw a very clear straight line from this album to the atmospheric electronic soundscapes of Moby, or the stadium-sized echoing emotion of early Coldplay.
It's incredible to think about how they laid the groundwork for the sound of the entire next decade.
They really did.
But that feeling Eno and Cale captured in 1990, that creeping anxiety under a beautiful surface, it didn't just stay isolated in the music world.
No, it grew.
Over the next 10 years, as the internet grew and our culture became increasingly chaotic, that anxiety metastasized. And by the year 2000, it exploded onto movie screens.
Which brings us to the second half of our discussion.
Right, shifting from a London recording studio to a hidden tropical island. We were talking about Danny Boyle's film, The Beach.
A film that, as the MMR piece argues, perfectly encapsulates the escape myth of youth at the end of the 20th century.
Most of us are familiar with the cultural footprint of The Beach. You have Leonardo DiCaprio playing the ultimate Y2K backpacker fantasy.
The character of Richard.
Yes, Richard. He's wandering through a sweaty, sensory overload Bangkok hostel, desperate to find something authentic in a world that feels increasingly manufactured.
He's looking for something real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he gets his hands on a secret map leading to a legendary, untouched hidden island,
A literal paradise on Earth.
completely cut off from the noise of the modern world. He and his companions set out, and against all odds, they actually find it.
They do find it.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Because the paradise they find is a mirage.
It's not a sanctuary at all.
It's a pressure cooker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The film completely deconstructs the fantasy. The hidden community on the island slowly, inevitably descends into madness.
The entire social structure collapses under the weight of its own secrets and basic human nature.
The film portrays this lush, gorgeous tropical landscape, not as a comforting haven, but as a too dazzling reality.
That's how the author puts it.
The sun is so bright, it literally blinds the characters to the rot underneath their feet.
It is the cinematic collapse of a digital-era utopia. The dream was fundamentally flawed from the moment they stepped on the sand.
And the connection the column makes between this year 2000 film and the 1990 Eno and Cale album is nothing short of brilliant.
It's not merely a thematic connection, it is entirely literal, right down to the film's iconic soundtrack.
Oh, the music of the beach was absolutely inescapable at the time.
It was a cultural phenomenon of its own. The film heavily features tracks like All Saints' Pure Shores with its crystal-clear, shimmering chorus,
Such a huge song.
and Moby's deeply quiet, melancholic electronic track, Porcelain.
Right.
The author of the MMR column argues that these songs are the direct, undeniable descendants of Wrong Way Up. They are the electronic utopias that Eno and Cale foreshadowed 10 years earlier in that studio.
They share that exact same DNA. That feeling of a shimmering ocean surface with a massive, heavy current pulling underneath.
It sounds like freedom, but it feels like dread.
Precisely. And this leads us to perhaps the most crucial philosophical point in the entire source material.
There is a famous defining quote from the film The Beach that the author highlights to tie this all together.
Let's hear it.
Paradise is not a place, it's a state of mind.
It's a state of mind. If you really internalize that, it changes the entire nature of the quest.
It does.
If paradise isn't a coordinate you can punch into a GPS, then what are the characters in the film, and by extension all of us, actually looking for when we try to escape?
We are looking for an internal landscape. We are trying to find a way to quiet our own minds.
Which is so hard to do.
And the column connects this film, quote, directly back to Brian Eno's core philosophy regarding ambient music.
How so?
The author points out that both the music of Wrong Way Up and the visual narrative of The Beach share a very specific, recognizable emotion. A transparent anxiety.
A transparent anxiety.
Even in the brightest, most beautiful, most seemingly perfect moments, there is a faint, lingering unease that you just can't shake.
It's like being at an incredibly expensive 5-star luxury resort.
Yeah.
We're sitting by a pristine pool, the water is perfectly warm, the sun is shining.
But you have this nagging, persistent feeling that you left the stove on back home.
Yes, you are in paradise, but your brain absolutely refuses to let you relax.
That is the exact psychological state the author is describing. The column shares another quote from Brian Eno that ties this all together perfectly.
What did Eno say?
He said, "The idea of ambient music is to make you feel part of a landscape that may not exist."
A landscape that may not exist. That is devastatingly accurate.
When you look through that lens, the hidden island in the beach functions in the exact same way as Eno's ambient music.
Because the island isn't truly a paradise.
It is a simulation. It's a blank screen onto which these anxious characters project their deepest desires.
It is an illusion of a utopia that simply cannot and does not exist in reality.
Both the music of 1990 and the film of 2000 are exploring this phantom utopia that modern humans are constantly, exhaustingly chasing.
So what does this all mean? We have to ask ourselves, why does this matter today?
Right.
We've got two brilliant musicians clashing in a studio 35 years ago, and a blockbuster movie about a backpacker's nightmare from 25 years ago. Why should you, listening to this deep dive right now, care about these cultural echoes?
It's a fair question.
I want you to think about where you escape to in our current 21st century reality. When the daily grind gets to be too much, where do your eyes go?
Our methods of escape have evolved drastically, but the underlying psychological drive hasn't changed a bit.
Not at all.
The MMR column brings this entire historical discussion crashing right into our present day. The author looks at our modern era, this age of AI and SNS, where algorithms dictate our reality.
Where we are endlessly scrolling through curated feeds of other people's fake paradises.
We don't need to fly to Thailand to find a mirage anymore. We just unlock our screens.
We are more technologically connected than any generation of humans in history.
Yet, as the author acutely points out, the phrase wrong way up serves as a striking, almost painful metaphor for modern civilization itself.
Because we have ascended to incredible technological heights. We have built the global, borderless utopia the 1990s dreamed of.
But we are completely lost.
We are digitally tethered to thousands of people, yet study after study shows we have never felt more utterly isolated.
The wrong way up.
We climbed the ladder of progress rung by rung, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall the entire time.
We thought the internet would be the ultimate beach.
We thought it would be the ultimate connected paradise where everyone was equal and understood, but instead it's often just another illusion.
A simulation that leaves us feeling far emptier than before we logged on.
The music of Eno and Cale, the author writes, was deeply prophetic.
The column describes it as music after giving up on paradise.
Music after giving up on paradise.
The melody quietly, persistently asks us a very difficult question. If we can't find paradise in the physical world, and if our digital world is just a hollow simulation, maybe we simply have to build paradise within the art, within the sound itself.
That is a profound way to look at why we create art in the first place. And the column ends its main analysis by describing the final scene of the beach, which captures our modern reality so perfectly.
It really does.
The island community has violently collapsed. The dream is over. Richard has returned to civilization, and the final shot shows him sitting alone in a dark room.
Smiling at an email on a glowing computer screen.
There is no dazzling tropical light anymore. The dream of the physical, tangible community is dead.
But as the article notes, in his heart, as he looks at that screen, there's the echo of a distant sound. It's a prayer after losing paradise.
It is a sobering realization.
That decade, from 1990 to 2000, as the article summarizes, was an era where the boundary between reality and fantasy completely, permanently melted away.
It was the turning point. You had the rapid rise of the digital world, promising us absolutely everything, infinite knowledge, infinite connection, while the physical world felt increasingly suffocating and complex.
And as we've explored today, the collaboration of Brian Eno and John Cale wasn't just a brief, interesting musical experiment.
It was a cultural seismograph.
Exactly. They were actively recording the sound of an unseen beach, an imaginary utopia, echoing in our collective minds.
And that echo still reverberates today. Every single time we put on a pair of noise-canceling headphones to escape the noise of a crowded subway car.
Or every time we lose ourselves for hours in an endless scrolling feed on our phones.
We are doing exactly what they were doing. We are still listening for that receding landmass.
We are still hoping, against all evidence, to find that pure shore.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final, incredibly subtle detail from the MMR column that we have to address.
Yes.
It fundamentally shifts how you look at this entire timeline.
This is brilliant. If you scroll to the very bottom of the source material, past the main essay, past the conclusion, there is a recommended reading list provided by the site.
Right.
And one of the suggested columns listed there is fascinating when you place it in the context of everything we've just discussed.
It is. I saw that, and it completely flips the script on the escapism narrative.
The recommended article is titled Post-2010s Western Horror Films.
Okay.
And the subtitle specifically notes that it focuses on the fear of silence in the era of low frequencies.
Just reading that title alone gives you a completely different feeling than the shimmering sense of 1990. It feels heavy.
It is incredibly heavy, and I want to leave you with a thought built entirely on that subtle recommendation at the bottom of the page.
Go for it.
Think about the cultural progression we've just mapped out. If the lush synth pop and the shimmering ambient sounds of the 1990s and the 2000s were our culture's desperate attempt to simulate a bright, tropical utopia, does our recent shift toward silent, low-frequency, deeply unsettling horror soundtracks in the 2010s and beyond mean something darker?
You mean, have we given up the ghost?
Exactly. Does it mean we finally stopped searching for a fake paradise? Have we exhausted the illusion of the beach, realizing the map was always a lie? And are we now finally being forced to face the terrifying, quiet realities of the world we actually built?
That is an incredibly haunting thought to leave on. The music stopped trying to take us away to a landscape that doesn't exist and started forcing us to look at the room we are actually sitting in. That is definitely something to mull over the next time you feel that sudden urge to pack a bag and disappear. Keep questioning those ladders you're reclining. Keep examining the paths you are ascending. And always listen closely for your own echoes of utopia. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We will catch you next time.